UN-backed human rights experts have accused Israel of committing crimes against humanity and Palestinian armed groups of war crimes in their first in-depth reporting into the war on Gaza and the attacks on October the 7th. The independent UN investigation found Israel responsible for using starvation as a method of warfare. It says Israeli forces have intentionally engaged in attacking civilians and their forcible transfer. It also cites examples of sexual violence, torture, inhuman treatment and arbitrary detention. The three-member commission also investigated the October the 7th attacks, but Israel prevented investigators from visiting the sites of violations. The probe, however, accuses Palestinian fighters of killing civilians and taking captives. It says it also documents the torture and mistreatment of victims. I'm joined now by our diplomatic editor, James Bays. James, I've just been having a very brief look through this report. It is 60 pages long. What's your take on what's in the report?
Well, I think it's very damning, and you're right, it's damning because of the detail. A 60-page report, but actually there are two other fact-finding sections, analysis, that are attached to the report. The report's in two bits, really, because this Commission of Inquiry has the mandate to look at human rights abuses that take place in the occupied Palestinian territories, so that's Gaza, the West Bank, and occupied East Jerusalem, but also to look at what has happened in Israel. That's Israel, it's in 1947 borders. So there are two different detailed reports attached to this. The bit that's on Israel, 1947 borders, and mainly on what happened on October the 7th, 59 pages, and the bit that's about the occupied Palestinian territories, so the West Bank and Gaza, 126 pages. And as you say, the allegations and the findings here are really serious. War crimes and crimes against humanity, including the crime of extermination, has been carried out, according to the Commission of Inquiry, by Israel. It talks about starvation being used by Israel as a method of warfare, intentional attacks on civilians, and starvation being used as a method of war, collective punishment, including the use of sieges. Now, with regard to October the 7th, it's very critical of Hamas. It says it carried out war crimes too, willful killing, murder and torture, and it does say there were some instances of sexual violence, gender-based violence, although on that it's worth noting that it's looked at some of the allegations of rape made by the Israeli authorities and by some Israeli journalists and says it cannot independently verify some of those allegations.
James, as we were mentioning, this is the first time an in-depth report has been brought to bear, and as you say, the level of detail does appear to be quite significant. Just having a quick look at it as you're talking. In terms of the importance of this report, how significant is it?
Well, this is a body that is set up by the UN Human Rights Council. It reports to the Human Rights Council. In fact, the full report is coming out in a week's time in Geneva, but also to the UN General Assembly. It makes its report in New York. It's headed by the former High Commissioner of Human Rights, Nave Pillay. In terms of the human rights architecture of the United Nations, this is the main thing, the main body of investigating human rights abuses. It's an ongoing investigation. It has no end date for its mandate, looking at human rights abuses in Israel, in Gaza, the West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem. So on top of what we've already had, which is rulings by the International Court of Justice, provisional measures there, and the International Criminal Court, which now wants to bring charges against Hamas leaders and the Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister. This is very important, I think. As I say, among the bodies of the United Nations dealing with human rights, yes, you have a special rapporteur who looks at the Palestinian territories. You have special rapporteurs in the UN system who look at other aspects, specific subject areas like torture or housing. But in terms of the whole of this conflict, this is the body that is tasked with looking at human rights abuses, finding the facts and finding its own view legally of what's happened. It's allowed to make legal findings and, most importantly, gathering evidence. And a lot of evidence has clearly been gathered here, which potentially can go to a judicial body, to one of those courts at a later stage. It is worth saying that Israel condemns this latest report, never cooperates with this body. The Commission has had to do all of its evidence gathering remotely because Israel doesn't allow it into Israel or into Gaza or into the West Bank or East Jerusalem for that matter. And the US also not sympathetic towards this Commission of Inquiry body, but it's yet more damning weight of evidence, I think, against Israel, which senior Israelis and, for that matter, senior Americans like President Biden, who will be coming where I am to Puglia in Italy in the coming hours, they will all have to take quite seriously.
James, thank you very much indeed. That's our diplomatic editor, James Bays.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.